On board as well, Bob Weiner, Robert Weiner, if you will, Democratic strategist, columnist, and former communications director for Clinton Drug Czar General Barry McCaffrey. He's also former chief of staff of the House Committee on Aging. Bob, Happy New Year to you as well.
And Happy New Year to you and Jane. You know, Pat and I are just back from Mexico. We're in Charlotte between planes to do your show. And the people in Mexico thought this was such a farce. Coco Bongo, which Discovery Magazine channel says is the world's best nightclub, Pat and I saw it. They have contortions and electricity and constant energy and music, and it's a show, and they say it's a better show than Las Vegas. The Fiscal Cliff show was right up there with it. That was pure entertainment.
Yes, the Mexican government, long known for being a bastion of continuity, calm, and unruffled equanimity in governance. Sorry, I'm just not going to take many pointers from that area of the globe. Let me start with you, Bob. By a vote of 257, we were just talking with Joel Gerke of the Washington Examiner. By a vote of 257 to 167, the House approved, of course, the Senate's bill to avoid the fiscal cliff. You had 16 Dems and 151 Republicans voting no. But instead of the president getting to scapegoat government overspending onto those making between 200 and 250,000, the threshold instead became 400 to 450,000. Now the revenues gained are coming to about 600 billion over 10 years, but with only 15 billion in cuts. So, Bob, in financial terms, what gains were actually made on the debt? Bob Weiner.
Well, now, Alan and Amy, I want you to listen to this because you will never again hear it from my lips. But John Boehner was a national hero, a profile in courage for getting a block of Republicans but a majority against the bill and to combine it with a majority of Democrats to solve the tax problem, the doc fix, the milk fix, which would have doubled in price, the alternative minimum tax, to not cut Social Security and Medicare, and 2 months delay of sequestration. To accomplish all of that, and to not let the country go over the fiscal cliff was an act that was necessary for government and could cost John Boehner politically. He did, by negotiating with President Obama, a profile in courage.
Was that the most archetypal representation of courage, Amy Ridenour, or was perhaps he able to comport himself as a brave person more so when he told Senator Harry Reid to go F himself?
Oh, I hate that kind of a choice because I don't want to be endorsing the F word on national radio. But, yeah, I'd have to go with that.
By the way, folks, I'm not clowning around. That's exactly what the good Speaker of the House told the Senate Majority Leader to go ahead and do, essentially requiring him to commit some sort of double-jointed gesture that's normally beyond the reach of most folks. But, Amy, go ahead.
Yes, well, you know, it was an interesting thing because Senator Reid had said that John Boehner was a dictator in the House when Mr. Reid himself decides what goes on in the Senate, what they even vote on. So, you know, it was a pretty low thing that he said. But going back to the entire fiscal cliff thing, although I appreciate Bob's bipartisan sentiment, I can't go with him because Mr. Boehner basically caved in. What he needed to do, and I'm not saying it would have been easy, and he may well have failed even if he had tried this, is he needed to have a course charted months ago in which the House of Representatives was repeatedly passing legislation to deal with all these issues and essentially forcing the Senate to vote on the same thing or at least something comparable, so that there would be negotiations in the conference committee and leave the president out of it. Now, before we all assume that I'm just saying that because I'm a conservative, think about this, and I think this is just as important if you're a liberal as if you're a conservative. Because we are no longer doing the normal appropriations process by which bills for spending come out of the House, there's hearings in the House and Senate, people get to know what's in legislation and contact their legislators. What we have now basically is a tyranny in which the president simply says, I will negotiate with you, we will come up with what I like, and then people will have about 3 minutes to decide if they're going to vote for it or against it, and the American public will find out what's in it after it's already done. This is no way to run a country, and it doesn't matter if the president's a Republican or a Democrat. We need to get away from this and go back to a normal procedure where there's time for the American people to weigh in on things.
Bob Weiner, is it okay again for Americans to weigh in on things, or do we continue as we are?
Well, tyranny, Amy. Tyranny means that Cantor and McCarthy weren't even for this bill. The Senate passed the bill 89-8 with only 5 Republicans against it. The tyranny is by the Tea Party of the House that won't allow a bill to be voted on even when the American people support it. What you have here was a consensus of the American people that wanted those tax breaks stopped for the rich. It happened. That's what the election was about, and that's what we got.
Bob, I have to ask you something. Amy, real fast. Bob, I have to ask you something. Boehner's deal was going to give Obama over $800 billion in revenue. Obama's consternation brought about a deal with only $600 billion. The president wound up, through his own misadventures, getting less than the GOP would have otherwise provided. Why is it Obama's celebrating?
Because of the tyranny of the Tea Party, which stopped the Obama-Boehner deal that would have done $1.7 trillion in both cuts and spending. They agreed.
Bob, I'm sorry. You're responding to a question never posed, as well as opposing an argument never asserted. I asked you a very straightforward question. Boehner offered Obama over $800 billion in revenue. Granted, it would have been without raising the tax rates, but still more revenue, which everybody agrees is the most important thing. But through Obama's consternation and resistance, he wound up with a deal that only gave him $600 billion. How is that a victory? He would have been better off with $200 billion more, would he not?
Do you know, with the $1.7 trillion, they were only $200 billion apart in their grand bargain, and the Tea Party wouldn't let them agree to it? That's the problem here, Alan, is we had a bigger deal, Simpson-Bowles-like, in the making, but the Tea Party stopped it. That has to be corrected downstream in the near future.
Well, you got to remember, the president already said that he was going to go along with $1.2 trillion in revenue without having to raise tax rates. And he said that in 2011, that if the math worked then, why couldn't it work today? I mean, when you think about it, Amy, am I wrong in saying that the president in 2011 pretty much was echoing then what the GOP are saying now, yes?
Correct. The president was fighting this year against what he advocated last year.
I mean, if this guy's principles were any more kaleidoscopic, they'd look like a box of crayons left out in the rain. Let's be honest here. More upon our return. Folks, stick with us. You are with Battle Line, Main Street Radio Network. I'm Alan Nathan.
But let me tell you this, he had the courage of his convictions to raise tax rates. I'm going to have the courage of my convictions not to raise the debt ceiling until we reform our nation and stop becoming Greece and finally start getting out of debt. I hope Republicans will fight as hard on the debt ceiling as Barack Obama did on tax rates.
And that, of course, was the illustrious musings of Senator Lindsey Graham of the great state of South Carolina, essentially pointing out that the leverage that comes with the debt ceiling is something that might prove to be far more formidable than anything that could have been garnered had the GOP perhaps squandered whatever political equity they might have remaining on the fiscal cliff issue. His advice, go ahead, vote for this thing right now. The threshold's been up to 400 to 450,000. Let's get what we can, and then when it comes to a few months from now, we can apply far more leverage than we currently possess with our debt ceiling hike authority, using it, of course, to ensure that some serious spending cuts are brought about. I'm ever yours, Alan Nathan, the militant moderate. Once again, this is the Oasis for those who have an aversion to the left-right, black-white, two-dimensional approach. And we're covering a plethora of challenges. Democrats' fiscal cliff deal raises $600 billion, while the GOP would have raised over $800 billion without rates going up. You got to wonder why Obama's so proud. Also, as you just heard, Senator Lindsey Graham is telling the GOP, look, save your powder, save it all for the debt ceiling fight, where you guys are going to have a lot more leverage for cuts. Wondering what we can expect from that battle to come. And with a straight face, Obama condemns voting against raising the debt ceiling, despite doing so himself as senator in 2006. We have assisting me in the Opinion Department, my battling titans, Amy Ridenour, president of the National Center for Public Policy Research. Amy, good to have you with us still.
Thank you, Alan.
Bob Weiner joins us as well, Democratic strategist, columnist, and former communications director for Clinton drug czar General Barry McCaffrey. Bob, always a pleasure.
It's a pleasure, Alan, but the reason that Obama is proud is that the Republican way would have cut Social Security, Medicare, food poverty programs, and scientific medical research. Is that anything to be proud of? That's what the Republicans wanted.
If we were worried about putting a kibosh on medical research, we wouldn't have just put a tax on new medical devices, Mr. I Love Obamacare.
Ooh, that was a good hit there, Bob. What about that?
That's a tax on the providers, not on the people.
Oh, yeah. Who
benefits.
pays that? The
And
people
that's
who
difference.
use the devices.
No.
Let's not pretend
Actually
you don't know
not.
better.
Actually,
All right.
not. What the Republicans
All right.
wanted to do was to tax, get the benefits all to the providers. Obama wants to make sure that the beneficiaries are protected. That's the difference between the two approaches.
No.
What I want to get to right now, though, is the debt ceiling battle. Let me go to you first, Amy, on this one. I know you're not always a big fan of Senator Graham, but he essentially was saying, folks, look, let's not fight the battle we'll wind up losing anyway in a couple of weeks. Let's go ahead, get the best deal we can, and then if our true goal is to reduce spending, to bring about a declination of the fiscal hemorrhaging to which we've been subjecting our nation, if that's our true primary goal, then let's wait for a couple of months to pass when we really have far more leverage with the debt ceiling hike authority. Does he have a point, Amy Ridenour?
Oh, he has a point when he talks about Benghazi, but not about any of this, and this is why. If you are fighting to bring our federal budget in line with what can afford to spend, then you don't just say, well, we won't fight on this, and we won't fight on this, and we won't fight on this, but then we'll take a stand. What you have to be doing is fighting on every single thing for two reasons. The first is you'll never win if you don't finally get your you-know-what together and fight. And number two, every time you do fight, you educate the American people about what your goals are and why you believe in them. Now, obviously, the American people are free to disagree with you, but if you never get around to the point of making a strong case, guess what? They're never going to agree with you because they don't know what you want.
What about what Joel Gerke brought up a little earlier on my show? Again, commentary staff writer for the Washington Examiner. He pointed out that by doing what the Republicans did, essentially they were able to lock into place not just 98, but now 99% of all the Bush tax cuts, something that was considered to be an anathema by the Democrats 10 years ago. 10 years ago, the Democrats, and I remember this battle very, very well, they were wholly against absolutely all of the Bush tax cuts. All of them. All of them.
Yeah.
Now, they used to like to characterize it as cuts for the wealthy, but the reality is you had a huge amount of Americans affected by this, and the vast majority of savings were experienced by middle-class folks. And now everybody, 99% anyway, have these tax cuts not for only 10 years, but permanently. So in the aggregate, if we look at it from, through a prism that takes into account the entire last 10 years, it would appear as if the GOP got far more of what they wanted than did the Democrats get what they wanted. Amy Ridenour.
Well, I don't think so, because we also had another $330 billion in new spending in this legislation, doing things like extending the wind power tax credit, giving gifts to friends of Obama, and things of this nature. So you can't just say that there's only one thing in there. What they should have done, meaning the Republicans, is pass legislation for a tax cut. I mean a tax cut on top of the Bush tax cuts for anybody who's in the middle class and below if they're actually paying any income taxes. And they should have left the upper income tax rates exactly where they were under Bush. Then let the Democrats come back and say, no, we don't like a middle class tax cut. We're going to fight that. That's what people who had any intestinal fortitude would have done, but Mr. Boehner wasn't in that class.
How about
Alan,
your intestines, Bob?
Yeah, no, Alan, I agree with you. This is a strange one, or Amy disagrees with you, and I agree with you. Even Grover Norquist said it was a big victory. Republicans, they got 86% of what they wanted because it locked in the permanency. Although, by the way, permanent means until Congress changes it, like Clinton did. But it locks in the permanent. It's still changeable by law. But it locks in the Bush.
Well, it's comparatively far more permanent. It's comparatively far more permanent to the extent that you're not going to have in 10 years an obligatory dropping of it unless Congress proactively acts to counter it. In this case, unless Congress proactively acts to counter it, they're going to stay permanent. So, but let me bring up what Amy referenced herself, because we got these little gems from CNN. They report just an excerpt form. The American Taxpayer Relief Act of 2012, which passed the Senate early Tuesday morning, is a vehicle for a number of regular year-end tax extenders. Among the extensions is the excise tax carryover on rum produced in Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. It's a federal tax of which most is paid to the islands. And then CNN goes on to say there's also the extension of a tax credit for purchase of some electric vehicles with 2 or 3 wheels, such as scooters. It was a tax break included in the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009 and covers up to 10% of the vehicle's cost at or most $2,500. And then let me just say this very quickly. And they extended the depreciation model for motorsports complexes, Bob. Motorsport complexes, facilities that hold at least 7 days of racing, seat at least 70,000 people, and have concession stands that benefit charitable organizations. Why was this such a high priority, Bob Wiener?
Some things never change, Alan. Your point is well taken. There was a Christmas tree element to the bill. But you got to say that given what the options were, the courage that the House leadership, that Boehner did to bring this to a vote and stop the tax breaks, stop the tax increases that would have happened on 98 or 99% of the American people, was a very, as Biden said, you know what kind of big deal. It was an achievement. And by the way, this cynicism of politics, all these guys, listen to this from my lips too, all these guys who could have been home with their families, they're working during the whole New Year's, Christmas holiday when they really wanted to be with their families.
Aww.
And they virtually made the deadline. So I'm going to give them a little bit of credit.
My heart bleeds all the buttermilk you could imagine. Let me bring up this as well. I want to stick with Bob on this, then to you, Amy, real fast. Bob, what about the moral authority that seems to be wanting from the president as it relates to the debt ceiling hike? Now, he's saying that how dare the Republicans even consider voting against the debt ceiling. But here's what Barack Obama said in 2006, quote, the fact that we are here, this is when Bush wanted to have a debt ceiling hike. He said, quote, the fact that we are here today to debate raising America's debt limit is a sign of leadership failure. It is a sign that the U.S. government can't pay its own bills. It is a sign that we now depend on ongoing financial assistance from foreign countries to finance our government's reckless fiscal policies. Increasing America's debt weakens us domestically and internationally. Leadership means that, quote, the buck stops here, unquote. Instead, Washington is shifting the burden of bad choices today onto the backs of our children and grandchildren. America has a debt problem and a failure of leadership. Americans deserve better. This is a floor speech from Senator Barack Obama, March 20th, 2006. You cannot be the embodiment of the very thing you now chastise and still be taken seriously. Can you, Bob Wiener?
Well, your point is taken. There's a difference between babbling for a message and governing, which the Tea Party has yet to learn, by the way. When it really comes time to govern, you have to make responsible decisions. And so I am very much in favor of what Obama said. And by the way, I would take it a step further to what Clinton has said, that the Constitution gives him the authority to stop any abridgment of the debt ceiling, and he doesn't have to wait for Congress
Why
to
do we constantly have to re-say this? What the Constitution says is that we have to pay our debts, which means if we borrow, if we borrow money from somebody or we owe them something like a pension, we have to pay it. We don't have to go out and give NPR money or somebody who makes wind in California.
No, that's very true. I mean, the debt should not be questioned, and we've already acknowledged this. However, not raising the debt ceiling is not questioning the debt. It's merely forcing the government to restrain spending as well as compelling it to utilize the billions of already existing dollars currently allocated to duplicated programs of waste as defined by the Fed's own government accounting office. Thank you very much. Folks, you are with Battle Line, Main Street Radio Network. I'm Alan Nathan. Bob and Amy, always a pleasure.